So just the other day, I think it was Wednesday, I came across an ad on YouTube. It was a very important, life-changing moment for me. And I'm sure it's going to be for you once I reveal what it was about. It was an advertisement. Are you ready? On how to take the perfect selfie. It's been something I've been wondering about for some time. It's been occupying my mind because I'm always trying to find the right angle, right? And the perfect lighting. Doesn't that occupy your mind? I guess it should. Apparently, that's the ad. Well, that was the point of the ad. And the person in it was basically trying to sell us something. She was saying how important it was to put that right image out there. Without blemish, without wrinkle, with the perfect lighting. All we need to do is download the app and then purchase this little device that goes over your camera lens on your phone that just gives the right setting. And then your friends and your family will be like, wow, I wish I could be and have the looks of this person. The gospel of the Lord. Image consciousness. Right? I think if we're honest with ourselves and with one another, at various points in our lives, we struggle with being conscious of our image, of how we put ourselves out there, of how we look, how we might be perceived, how we might be received. Right? Sometimes it does occupy our minds and hearts, for good or for bad. I like to think that that first reading that we heard from the book of Genesis, after Adam and Eve had eaten the forbidden fruit, that was probably the first image-conscious event of humanity that has now been part of us since the beginning. That desire to hide ourselves from God, from one another, and from ourselves. How often do we fear being exposed? Letting that true image be seen and received. Because of fear. Fear of not being liked, fear of being rejected. Fear of not being accepted. Image consciousness can really occupy us and prevent us from being who we really are. Where we filter ourselves and ultimately filter how we act and are in the world. This can be a maddening event. And certainly it occupies the mind and heart of our culture. In terms of the selfies that are constantly being taken, or how we put ourselves out there for fear. Enter Jesus of Nazareth. Dare I say that he too suffered from image consciousness, but unlike any of us. Because what drove him into mission and ministry, what occupied his mind and heart and made him appear out of his mind and heart, was the fact that he always had on his mind and heart the consciousness that each one of us was made in the image and likeness of God. That was his number one concern. And that drove him into ministry. And people thought it was maddening because that concern trumped everything else and caused people's worlds to go upside down and be dismantled. It caused Jesus to go out to the margins and there declare the image and likeness of God and the real loving presence of God in their midst. It drove Jesus to be inclusive and to invite into his circle of relationships, such that, as we heard in our gospel, all were his sisters and brothers and mother. People thought he was out of his mind, that he was mad. And indeed he was. He was maddened by the love of God that drove him into this. And the people, especially those in power, wanted to filter his vision. They wanted to put a device over how he saw things and narrow his ministry so that it wasn't no longer inclusive, that it was not about bringing people together, but dividing. And it got him into trouble. And here we are as his followers. We too should be finding ourselves troubled and in trouble in our world. Because we are to be about that same vision, that same image consciousness. And it starts right here with what we do every time we gather in this space. In a process of image consciousness that we call Eucharist, where we take the perfect selfie, where the light of Christ shines on all of us together when we act as one and declare to ourselves and to the world that God is here in our midst. And this truth drives us out into the world. And to bring that truth, that light, that exposure to a world in need of really seeing itself for what it truly is. Grace. United. Present with God's presence. That's the exposure that we do here and we need to do everywhere. No matter what fears may occupy us, no matter what biases or assumptions or past hurts occupy us, that can drive us crazy and out of our minds. This is what we are to be about. We are to be maddened in the same way that Jesus himself was. Can we do this? Can we be the people that God invites us and sees us to be in a world that always desires filtering? Let us expose God's presence to the world. Let us invite and challenge one another to look at ourselves and there see imprinted on our very selves that image and likeness of God that is imprinted on everything. And may we say amen to that presence.
Amen.